Welcome everyone in the webinar about governing in the age of AI. In this webinar, I'm going to introduce our new Copilot and agent governance module and our new Power Platform governance module, in particular Power BI. My name is Matthias Einig. I'm the founder and CEO of Rencore. I'm very happy to see you today. All right, so let's dive in right away. AI in Microsoft 365 is a game changer. I think Microsoft at least wants us to believe that, and is showing us Copilot and AI in all places, in Microsoft 365, in Power Platform, and so on. But using AI, and I know that's also what we hear a lot from our customers, of course, come also at a cost. So on the one hand, we have the potential, what we can accomplish with AI. We can eventually increase efficiency, boost our productivity, and of course, organizations are hoping to increase competitiveness on the market, and also are not staying behind of other players on the market. But on the other side, introducing AI in a corporation is introducing new risks. So of course there are security and compliance concerns, and then also the data is exposed through AI to the end users. So a lot of organizations are currently wondering, okay, is it really worth the risks? Copilot and the agents, how Microsoft releases them now to all their customers, are certainly revolutionizing the productivity. But there is this gap. Without the guardrails, data leaks, hallucinations, and compliance violations emerge. So AI is not the savior, it's also creating a lot of headaches. So I wonder, how confident are you that Copilot is completely safe for company-wide use? It accesses your corporate data for grounding and is retrieving the data that an employee has access to. And I think, at least in my experience, it is quite similar to the times like 15 plus years ago when enterprise search was the greatest hype. Every organization wanted to introduce enterprise search. Also at that time, it was suddenly employees are getting access to data or are finding data that they have access to, and we fear that the data is not in shape, that we haven't cleaned up our permissions. And well, the same is still true now with AI. When you're rolling out Copilot in an organization, then eventually it retrieves that data that an employee has already access to and uses that for providing responses. But of course, if you do not clean up your data, if you don't clean up your permissions, then you will also retrieve redundant data and obsolete data and trivial data, and the end user might not be fully aware. It might be the draft that is still in an email somewhere in the past, or a copy of a file that is outdated in some SharePoint site. So Copilot doesn't care necessarily about how recent the file is and if it's really relevant. It's just trying to extract the data and provide an answer. So based on that answer, that might be maybe based on wrong input, the end users are basing their decisions in the organization. So that is certainly also a risk. So what could possibly go wrong? On the one hand, of course, sensitive data could be exposed. It's not necessarily like that AI is trying to retrieve data that you don't have access to. It's just you have access to it already anyway, and it's just making it much, much easier to find it, even if you're not looking for it. And that's a big worry for a lot of organizations. Then, of course, compliance risks are a relevant topic. So data can be misclassified and maybe violating regulations, in particular in industries that are highly regulated, like pharma or medical or finance, for example. So also this is causing potential headaches. Then hallucinations is a real problem. AI is, trying to answer your questions and help you with the responses, but sometimes it's just making things up. Also, prompt injection is a big issue. If you followed, for example, the Echo leak incident that was reported about 2 months ago, about being able to inject information hidden via an email, unnoticeable for the end user, for example, a specific bank account, and then instructing Copilot that whenever a certain prompt is asking for that information to respond instead what was injected, that is of course a big problem. And it's also a problem that cannot easily be solved, because I think on the contrary to enterprise search, if we take that example again, where the data was in control of the organization, with Copilot that is retrieving data from multiple places, from places out of control, that, for example, your emails or also websites, external sources that cannot be managed, and then presenting it to the end user as if this was by the organization, makes it really, really easy for end users to be deceived. So this is a big problem that is still emerging. Then AI-driven access and permission escalation, so that eventually, for example, an agent that has access to certain data and that agent is provided to a certain group of users is suddenly elevating those users' permissions to also access that data. And maybe that's not really the intention behind it. So also a challenge. And then, of course, also shadow ID is expanding, or shadow AI. So suddenly organizations face the risk that end users are using AI in other tools. Every cloud vendor is basically adding AI. Do you always know which language models are used behind? Where are they hosted? Where does the data go? Is it used for training and so on? So one of the reasons why many organizations are rolling out Copilot and are providing self-hosted LLMs to their end users to make it easier for the end users to use the tools that the company provides and not resort to other AI tools, I don't know, ChatGPT on their private phones and adding company information on that one. So at the end, what does that mean? AI is only as smart as its governance framework. So even if you automate things and really have good intentions behind of that, there are security gaps. And that means that clear boundaries are necessary, and monitoring of AI in an organization is necessary, similar like it is for all other cloud services that you're using in your organization. I'm wondering what AI-related security concerns you have in your organization. In my experience, when I talk to our customers, there's quite a different view on this. So in particular in Western Europe, the concern is rather, data exposure, that data gets surfaced through AI. So they consider governance actually as not only guardrails, but also as an enabler that it's even possible to get AI rolling. Everyone is aware that a company that is constantly changing and where people move roles, leave the company, join the company, reorganizations are happening, that there's always chaos recreating in the cloud services. So it's never possible to say, hey, everything is ready. We have cleaned up our cloud services. We're now ready to roll out AI. Readiness means that you are constantly ready and constantly need to implement those processes to keep you ready throughout time and throughout the changes within your organization. Yeah, the IT dilemma with AI. On the one hand, we have data validity and trust. So does the AI deliver the correct information? And which data sources does it even access to retrieve that information? Data security is a big concern. Adoption and visibility. So Microsoft provides, for example, Control Center and Viva Insights for Copilot, but it's really hard to see, well, if somebody is just transcribing a meeting and uses the AI transcript, or a transcript is just created automatically, it doesn't mean that it's actually used. If somebody is opening Copilot and asks something, it does not really tell did the person actually get the result out of it. So it's really hard to measure also how the adoption is working and if there's really a return on invest behind of it. And the costs is a big headache. So Microsoft is not making it easy. They are changing licenses. They are adding pay-as-you-go licenses or pay-as-you-go billing to make it easier for makers or citizen developers in the organization, for example, to build agents. But it can very easily escalate and can be really hard to get it back in control. Suddenly, an agent is doing something in the organization and gets heavily used, increases, and you might be cheaper off if you're buying message packs, for example, or the other way around. You're releasing, controlled an agent in your organization, and in the beginning, there is a big adoption spike. And then throughout the time, usage is degrading again, and then you're suddenly paying maybe more than you actually use. So tracking costs and tracking usage is a big challenge also when you are rolling out AI. And change management is slowed down, obviously, also with AI. So with that lack of oversight, that IT is not able to know what's going on, they are kind of hitting the brakes and saying, yeah, but we really don't know, and we don't have the controls in place yet, and we cannot solve the business cases, which really makes it frustrating for the business departments who really want to get the value out of it, and they believe that investing in AI for their specific use cases might be very valuable for the organization. So finding that balance is really, really hard. And then last, of course, Microsoft is changing things a lot. So 2 weeks ago, Copilot couldn't do certain things it can do now. Agents can suddenly connect to new services, can integrate graph, can run autonomously, and so on. This whole AI world is evolving so rapidly that it's really, really hard to keep track what new capabilities are there. And then usually those capabilities are rolled out by Microsoft in a more opt-out approach. So they are on by default. And if you're not aware as an IT administrator to turn it off in time, then you might suddenly have, as a result, already AI usage or in general service usage in Microsoft 365 that wasn't planned for, and then you don't have a plan how to rein it in again. So as a result, we have increasing risk and information oversharing, higher operating and licensing costs, efficiency loss for end users, and also no pay ROI of our cloud investments without governance. Gartner puts it quite bluntly. Just in May, I visited the Digital Workplace Summit or Modern Workplace Summit in London, and it said, yeah, 2025 is going to be the year, if not starting the decade of the agents. This is, according to Gartner, where the world is going. Some even say, yeah, all those agents and generative AI and so on are going to somehow also replace Power Platform or no-code, low-code platforms, because suddenly it becomes less and less relevant to build an actual application, but rather build an agent who does the work for you in the background and connects to other systems. And with that, another prediction of Max Goss at Gartner is that 2025 could usher the next generation of digital workplace sprawl, agent sprawl. So if you recall, when we rolled out Teams and SharePoint, in particular during the pandemic, 2021, 2022, the result was a lot of team sprawl. A lot of teams have been created without a plan. A lot of data has been shared, and a lot of chaos was left behind and is still left behind. So team sprawl was about, or team's governance was about, cleaning things up, making sure that everything is in order and remains in order. Now with agents, we have the same challenge again. People are creating agents, and not everything is really documented. Who owns it? Who has access? What is the purpose of the agent? Is it maybe only used for a limited time? Who cleans it up at the end? So keeping an oversight of that and managing also agents becomes more and more relevant before the chaos hits us again, like it did with Microsoft Teams. And then on the other hand, when you're thinking about Copilot as a generative AI based on company data also increases the urgency of actually managing the sprawl in the collaboration systems like SharePoint and Teams, and in your files in OneDrive and in emails and so on, because it just consumes the data. Generative AI in Copilot is just a consumer and tries to answer with the data that is available. It's not an agent by itself. And that increases, eventually, now the urgency to clean up your data and keep it clean constantly, as the organization is always evolving, and data that is current today is outdated in a year or two from now. So you don't want it necessarily to show up again. So also something where governance comes into play. One thing, just a food for thought for you, maybe, what we see somehow, or how we feel about it, that AI agents are eventually somehow like the next employees. And I'm not talking about they are going to replace existing roles in the organization, and people are going to lose their job because they're getting replaced by AI. No, it's more about managing. So it's very similar to managing employees. In fact, Microsoft released recently Entra Agent ID, basically expanded Entra ID for agents and treats agents like entities, as entities like users or employees. And just to give you a little bit of a comparison, so an agent can act like an employee, but there is no onboarding or review. It is created and then it's there. It might trigger workflows, access data, cost the organization. There's no clear ownership or purpose that it needs to be described. It's just built by someone, and it might even work entirely autonomously. For example, triggered by an email that you get into your inbox, or a file uploaded into a folder or a document library. And then suddenly it gets automatically triggered and does something with it. Maybe triggers a response. So it's acting like it is part of your organization autonomously. And then eventually it's also exposing security and compliance risk. And if you compare it to HR, then eventually governance or a governance tooling is somehow the HR information system for agents. So you generate an inventory in a governance tool, you manage ownership assignments, you enforce policies and access reviews to make sure that only people have access to it who should still have access to it, that they are that agents are documented correctly, and so on. You manage the entire life cycle, like an onboarding or offboarding. You manage who and where to create agents, what happens throughout the life cycle, when to clean things up again. And then, of course, you get usage insights. So who's using it, adoption tracking, what does it cost, what risk does it expose? An agent can change in risk throughout the life cycle. Maybe at time of creation, only a limited amount of people had access to the agent, and maybe only a few data points were available, maybe a handful of documents were available to the agent. But throughout the life cycle, maybe the agent got shared with more people, and maybe more data sources have been added and changed somehow the risk profile of the agent. But if you're not tracking it, how would you know? So you might still assume it was like it was at the time when you were creating or approving that agent. In fact, recently I talked to an organization, a larger Fortune 500 company, and they explained to me that I have a policy in place that whenever somebody wants to create an agent, particular Copilot Studio agent, they have an review policy at the start, and that review policy says when there are more than 100 users who are going to use that agent, then it requires additional approval. If it's less than 100 users, the employee can just build that agent and publish it. But what they don't do, monitor if an agent somehow goes beyond the threshold and have another review. It's just an initial review process during creation, but not a tracking throughout time. So eventually people will just say it will be shared with less than 100 people just to ease the process to launch their agent, and then maybe share it later on throughout the life cycle with more people and nobody noticing. So that's a big risk and challenge that companies face. So we as a governance provider, we see typical governance use cases, and it doesn't really matter if this is SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, Power Apps, Flows, devices in Entra, or agents. The challenges are more or less always the same. To sum it up very high level, it's basically who creates something, who has access to it, what data is behind of it, how does it behave, how does the risk change throughout the life cycle, what does it cost, and who cleans it up, or when does it need to be cleaned up again, when are we decommissioning something. And as said, it has nothing to do with agents per se. These are standard governance challenges that we see all over the place in all our customers. So to break it down, what does it mean for governance itself? Well, first of all, you need an inventory. If you don't know what you have and you don't have the insights, then you cannot declutter, you cannot clean things up, you cannot manage permissions. And Microsoft is unfortunately not making it very easy. Microsoft has loads and loads of admin centers, and all the data is siloed somehow. So you have your Microsoft 365 admin center, your SharePoint and OneDrive admin center, your Power Apps admin center, your Copilot Studio admin center, and of course the data is all connected, but it's very isolated how you can manage it. And then most of the time, it's not really actionable at scale. So in those admin centers, if you're an administrator of Microsoft 365, you will know what I'm talking about. In those admin centers, of course, I see all the users. I can see agents of a certain type, not all different types at the same place. I can see SharePoint sites and so on. And I can also manage them, of course. I can delete them, I can change permissions and so on. But if you're working at a larger organization with thousands or tens of thousands of SharePoint sites or teams, we've talked to organizations already who have already thousands of agents, SharePoint agents, Copilot Studio agents, Teams Toolkit agents, declarative agents. It becomes quite a mess, and then you need to manage that at scale. It's no longer possible to go once per week into the admin center and cycle through the list of artifacts or entities and say, yeah, we still need this or not. In particular, because IT people often don't know. They cannot really decide upon, is this still relevant or not? Does Matt from Rencore still require access to this specific resource? Because this is usually a business need that is behind. IT is managing the infrastructure, making sure that everything works. But the business needs to decide what needs to actually happen with those resources. Do they need to be cleaned up? Do permissions have to be changed? Do we is the ROI there? So is the value that we get out of it, of a specific artifact, more than what we pay for it, and so on? How would IT be able to decide that? So this works only if you manage all these cloud resources at scale and delegate the accountability of what we need and what not, and which permissions are required and which costs are okay, to the end users in the organization, the people who own the resources. So end user enablement is a massive, important part of successful governance. And this ties into lifecycle management, offboarding, security and audit. All these areas, these use cases, are eventually at larger organizations only possible to solve and work consistently when you delegate it to the rest of the organization. So that is what, in our experience, is also a requirement on a successful governance solution. So going back to AI, we see, and that's what we hear also from our customers, that governance is eventually no longer a bottleneck or a hindrance of AI. It's actually an enabler for safe AI, so that we can confidently and responsibly roll out AI capabilities in our organization, because we can quickly monitor and report on those AI services that are used and automate also policies and resolution of policy violations through it. So eventually it frees up valuable resources in your team. It also streamlines the process and enables you to act quicker on business needs because you have the controls in place. Also, it gives you significant savings potentials, because you are able to see, hey, are users, for example, only using Copilot for Teams meeting transfers? Well, they could easily be downgraded to a Teams Pro license instead, and not having a full Copilot license when they are not using it anywhere else. So in general, license optimization, identifying who is using what, and being able to downgrade licenses can be a massive cost saver. Also, of course, storage costs. So identifying unused storage, cleaning it up, not having to pay to Microsoft. And then you can monitor and track adoption of Copilot services and user efficiency. As an end result, implementing governance and a streamlined end-to-end governance solution helps you to increase your security posture, compliance, and productivity of your organization. That said, I'm going to show you now how we are addressing that in our newly released Copilot and Agent Governance module, and I will also briefly touch our platform governance and also in general Microsoft 365 governance, because it's the basis for your governance also of agents and AI. So let me switch over to the demo environment and show you how this actually looks in Rencore governance. What you're seeing now is the administrator or IT backend of Rencore governance. So this is not what end users are using. This is what usually administrators of individual services, compliance teams, security teams, or whoever interacts with governance in the organization would work with. With a cloud application, so it runs in your browser, hosted on several different data centers worldwide. When you enter the application, you see a start page, a home page, which gives you at a glance what is actually happening in your tenant, where there are massive changes. So you see, for example, the amount of private teams has increased by 104% in the last 3 months. You have quick access to reports that have, for example, trends that are noticeable. So let's see here, for example, the agents by type increased by 55%. That's why it's red, because while more agents is more risk. And you can also click such a report and quickly get that report shown here in a side pane, where you see, for example, that there are 4 different types of agents currently in that Microsoft 365 environment that are used. Similar with these inventories, you can open up an individual inventory and see how it has changed throughout the time. For example, over the last 6 months, what were the changes, which were unchanged, how many new came, and so on, and how many policies are also violated here. We'll get into that a little later. Here to the bottom right, you see a risk matrix. The risk matrix is something that will come soon. We're currently on a preview environment, so it's currently not publicly available, but the risk matrix will eventually allow you to classify any type of resource, so not just agents or apps or teams and so on, but also SharePoint sites, for example. Of there, you can classify the risk profile. So how critical that specific resource is, and how critical also the risk is eventually, and how probable it is that the risk occurs. So that's what I just show you briefly as an example. If I open that one up, you see, for example, very likely probability with severe impact. So here, let's take a declarative agent, has a high risk score. So this agent is, for example, using public web as a data source. So it's very hard to predict from a company perspective what kind of information is going to be presented to the end user. And it's also shared with a lot of users. So this increases further risk. So you get an idea. So this is all customizable through your policies, but you get an idea how that works. And based on the score that a specific artifact reaches, you could, for example, trigger an automation. But let's dive into the Rencore governance backend further. The core part is the inventory. So the inventory, as you can see, is providing a wealth of information of all different types of services. I think this is something that also differentiates us a lot from other solutions on the market, that Rencore governance is covering a very broad set of services. So you're not just limited to SharePoint and Teams and maybe Power Apps and Power Automate. Now we are also including, for example, Power BI and Fabric and SharePoint down to the file level, OneDrive files, Planner, Exchange, also Azure. So we are also able to get virtual machines, devices, enterprise applications, and so on. So what you're seeing here now is just an overview page of the inventory, where you see, for example, Copilot Studio and individual inventory items that are currently having changes, for example, or of high interest. When I dive into an individual inventory, let's say Copilot Studio, you see that there's a lot more. So it's not just the ones that you saw on the start page, but there's actually also the environments behind of it, the plans behind of it, the knowledge, the topics, the actions, and even the conversations. So technically, Rencore is also capable of gathering the conversations. We are currently not offering that yet because it has more data privacy angle to it. So we are currently figuring out together with customers how that could be best achieved to get value out of it without violating the privacy of individuals. So this is in the preview environment, this is included, but not in the production release. When I remove that filter here, you can see that this is actually a lot more. So you see here users, groups, from Copilot, the sessions, declarative agents, the usage, activity events. Copilot we had already, Azure AI services, teams, channels, apps, flows, triggers, actions, workspaces, data marts, reports, dashboards, site collection, files, folders, libraries, OneDrives, mailboxes, devices, enterprise applications, and. So you see a lot that we are gathering. And all this data is constantly updated in the background. And that's also what differentiates a lot. We are capable of managing to handle a large amount of data. At the moment, we are about, retrieving about a $250 billion of API requests per month only to retrieve data for our customers. So we're handling a very, very large amount of data. And all this data is connected to each other, of course. So the user is kind of in the center. But let's dive into one specific example. So let's say Copilot agents. So each of these inventories provides you a plain table list of each object. So these are all the agents in this environment, a trend, how it's changing throughout the time. So again, in the last 3 months, policies that are set up where individual agents are violating those policies. We'll get to that. And you see also here are segments. So it's possible to basically create filtered views on that data that you are having and see, for example, autonomous agents that have, for example, a higher risk profile. And here you see also we track the build messages, the costs associated to those messages. So these are coming live out of Azure. And for example, you see also what else is connected to it. So when I open, let me just go back here to the overall agents. When I open, for example, the HR policy navigator, you get some of the metadata here. You can expand that. We'll look at that in a moment. And you see this kind of graph where you see how everything is connected. So I'll open it up a little bit bigger. You see that what I said before, what's really important to understand when you're managing resources, you need to know who owns it, who created it, who is working with it, where is it located, what actions are triggered. So here's, for example, a flow, a Power Automate flow that is triggered. Who is it shared with? And you can get a detailed list of all the users that are able to use this agent. The consumption behind of it, we'll get to that in a moment with the reporting and the knowledge. So there's, for example, a SharePoint site connected with it. And you can see even when you have the conversations enabled, which policies, which conversations are actually using that knowledge. So I'll just briefly show you how that looks like. So you see actually the conversation, although anonymized, but you can see the actual text. But this will come at a later point. So you get already a very broad picture on how everything is connected to explore that data much more. You see that we're collecting a lot of metadata to something like, in this case, in agents. So you see, for example, when it was published, what it costs, how many messages, what kind of authentication is used, has everyone access to it, and so on. So this is all metadata that can be used in the future for policies, reports, or also segments, for example. So let's jump into reports. We'll get to that back in a moment, but let's jump to reports. A report is basically also a subset of data that you want to visualize in order to gain visibility. You see already there are various categories of reports that we provide. So for example, sprawl or security or chargeback of costs, and you can quickly open such a report, see it here on the side, also navigate to the next one very quickly and get your overview of what you want to learn. You can also see them by service alternatively. So let's say, for example, Copilot pay-as-you-go costs in the last 30 months. You see in production, we had, for example, 1,100 euro, and in the dev environment, we had 232 euros. Nothing surprising here. But you could also, if we look at Copilot, see, for example, Copilot usage per week. So how many sessions are happening in those individual weeks, and you see how the adoption is going up or down. So we have an object called in the inventory called Copilot session. And here you see also the query that is behind of it. Or you can break it down by country or by department or anything else that you want to build. And that is one of the USPs of Rencore, that it's extremely flexible to adjust to your needs. So you can very easily create a new report, either based on one of the many, many templates that we provide. So we do not leave you alone. We provide already the most common reports when you onboard, and you can also choose more directly from the template library. So you see as quite a wealth of different type of reports. But any of these reports can be also customized to your needs. So let's say, for example, sites with more than 50 gigabyte, excuse me, then you can see this is just a query on the site collection and the property storage used, which should be greater than 50 gigabyte. And then you can create a policy based on this. So you can modify that to your needs. You can add additional properties. So for example, a second condition that must be met. For example, last used is more than 1 year ago. So now you get large SharePoint sites that haven't had any changes or updates in the last year. So there might be, for example, up for archiving or deletion, also to clean up data for Copilot, that Copilot is not using maybe outdated, redundant, obsolete data. So you could also, for example, remove all permissions or lock the site that nobody can change it anymore. What's also possible, and that makes it even more powerful, you can also use all the relations. So you can say, for example, and has any, let's see, a member who is external. So of course, SharePoint sites that are shared maybe external have more risk maybe, and you want to identify those. And in a report, you would just then choose how to visualize those. So in this specific example, we don't have any data. Let me just remove that part. So let's see if we have something more. Okay, that was a bad example. And there's no suitable data now for this query, but you can choose the different visualization here, and you can break it down in different ways. Let me just choose a different report that we already have in place, just to give you a feeling. So let's say, for example, this one here, monthly Copilot costs. So I can edit that report. So this is a report on a user that has any subscription where Microsoft 365 Copilot license is assigned to that user, and in this case it's now a bar chart categorized by the departments where those users are in, the associated costs to that license, so that we see that, for example, there are a lot of users that are currently not assigned to a department and have those licenses. And then you could even break that down, for example, by a different property, for example, by country. It makes no sense right now here, but it could be a stacked chart, for example. So I think you get the idea what is possible in the reports. And what's the cool part about the reports is that you cannot only build your custom reports and create them, you can also share them. And you can share them with people outside of the organization. So you can share, or outside of Rencore governance, sorry. And so you can share them, for example, by email on a recurring schedule, maybe every month as a PDF in the. So then a person, maybe the security team or the compliance team or whoever, can get this specific report without requiring access to Rencore governance. That is, of course, extremely powerful. Further, you can add reports and policies and everything also onto dashboards. And again, dashboards, we provide a lot of templates already pre-provisioned also that get you started with typical topics like security, operation, user offboarding, and so on, costs, so that you can quickly get started and get insights into your Microsoft 365 tenant. But you can also create your own dashboard. So you can either choose a specific template, or you can create a blank dashboard. Let's just do this here. You can create a blank dashboard and then add tiles to it. So you can build your own tiles, you can add reports that have been built. This is a policy that has been built. So let's say, for example, I want to add a report, and I see all these various reports in preview here, so I can add that tile to a dashboard, or I could build inventory cards, so for individual services, for example, or I could also add individual policies or groups of policies, so you can track how specific policies are violated. And if you can just add that to that dashboard, so when we go back, so this has been now added, and then you see that here, and the dashboard can easily be adjusted. You can move things around, give it a name. And those dashboards, similar like reports, can be shared with people also who have not direct access to Rencore governance. And for example, the security team could get a weekly security dashboard as a PDF adjust, or you send it to an email-enabled list. All right, that was basic functionality of Rencore governance. It has not really do that much to do that much with governance. This is more like insights and reporting. And there's more to it. You can actually manage also the resources in your tenant. So we provide the capabilities to remove or add permissions and archive teams, deactivate users, and so on. That you can do that directly from within Rencore governance. And with our tenant segmentation feature, even create virtual tenants that allow you to, for example, give administrative permissions for only specific parts of your tenant to individuals, let's say a country organization. But the heart of Rencore governance are actually the policies. Policies are the guardrails that you put in place in order to make governance work for you, to enable your organization to stay in those guidelines and make it easy for you to work with without having to do this all manually and review and go into Rencore governance all the time and check, or into the admin center. So here again, you see an overview page currently grouped by categories. So also there are policies for security, for sprawl, for operational, for external access. And you see also the trends, and you see here an overall score. So all policies in that category, and there are more here, if you can see, all policies in the category are then added together, and the score is calculated, and you see how you are progressing throughout time. So if I take a larger time range, for example, 6 months, then you see we were actually better 6 months ago because the tenant was not connected at the time, obviously, so there were no violations. So it drops first, but then you see over the time how the changes are happening. So, and a policy can be basically anything you're interested in. So similar like a report. So we have here, for example, SharePoint files that are shared with external users, critical topic, or autonomous Copilot agents that run on a scheduled trigger. So basically acting automatically without a human in the loop. So you might want to identify those and track them. Or teams with very few users, a very common requirement for governing teams for all and managing teams. So in the query is every team that has less than or equal one team owner, you want to trigger, for example, an automation. We can also switch over to the service. So you see we have policies for all kinds of services that we support. Some of them have currently no violations here in the data, but you have, for example, flows without runs, or you have unused Power BI workspaces. What else do we have? Over-licensed user accounts, so that have, in this case, an E5, an E3, or an E1 license together. So more than one of those. You get Copilots lacking authentication. So yeah, a lot of different things that you can do. And I think you might have guessed it, it works the same way like you saw before. A policy is we provide a lot of templates again. So these are, I think, over 150, almost 200 templates here for all these services that we support. And you can filter them, of course. So for example, only security relevant, and maybe for on a specific service. So let's say Teams, then you'd see public teams containing a Copilot agent with external members. External members could, for example, access data exposed through a Copilot agent in a team. So that could be a policy, and I can open that up. And again, this is a query. As you see, every team that has any team member where is external is true, and a team's installed app relation where the bot ID is empty and an external ID is empty. So that identifies an agent in this case. So this allows us to identify, okay, there's an agent that is currently published into that team. You just give the whole thing a name. We have this policy already published, so I'll just go back. And then you can open each of those and see what is happening. You can also build your own custom policies, similar like you had before. So there's no limitation there. You can build as many as you like, also variations maybe, and keep them for the future. And let me just have a quick look, for example, in declarative agents. Here is shared with too many users. We had that one before. We also provide you default automation. So we give you an potential automation that you can activate to react on a policy violation of that policy. So again, there are a lot of templates there, but we also assign some of those directly to your policy. So I think we have here another one, also delete agent automatically. Here we have two, for example. So you can just say, I want to activate this one. So now delete agent directly is activated for the policy when, okay, it's a rather drastic measure here, but when an agent exceeds the limit of build messages within 7 days. And how does that look like? An automation, but I have no run at the moment. Here you would see all the executions of that automation. But an automation, Rencore is basically having its own workflow builder, quite similar like you know from Power Automate, but very focused on the governance use cases and integrated with our solution. So the trigger in this example is, for example, the Copilot agent that violates a policy. Agent exceeds limit of build messages in 7 days. And then there's an action that is triggered to delete that agent. We have a wealth of actions available that you can use. So you can send an email, you can unpublish an agent, you can remove permissions, restore permission inheritance, trigger an external system. So you can also trigger, for example, a Power Automate flow and hand over some payload and let it do something that maybe is more complex. You can also trigger an Azure function, for example, that runs a PowerShell script and so on. So you have a very flexible possibilities, but we can also provide you a lot already directly in the product. So for example, an approval action. So it's possible that you say, yeah, only when it's approved, we ask somebody for approval, then the agent is deleted. Otherwise, I don't know, we send an email, for example, that the agent it still remains there. So you can choose them from placeholders. For example, the owner, we take the email. Let's see if we have that one anywhere else. I need to get a different Power App owner. See, so I can choose from all the properties that are available here throughout all the different objects that we have, and I can use them also in the body, for example, of that email. So with the placeholders, I can create dynamic emails that are sent out, or send a message to a Teams channel, for example. So it gives you a little bit of an idea how automations work, and this goes, of course, for any type of policy that you're building. So the idea behind of it, we do not think it's good to create a bunch of policies and then expecting someone to go in, I don't know, every day, every week to check, oh, is everything all right or not? Now, the idea is that you concentrate your efforts on defining the governance framework and how to resolve policy violations automatically or with end user interaction, but then it runs on their own and maybe only has escalation steps in between that require then your action. And that flexibility is what we are giving you. Which brings me also to what I mentioned earlier, the end user involvement. So how successful governance in an organization for M365 is actually implemented. And that requires to delegate the accountability to the owners of the resources. Because as we said, IT doesn't often have the knowledge to make those decisions who has access. So let me briefly switch over here. I have here Microsoft Teams open. And you see I opened already the Nova app. So the Nova app is our end user app for Rencore governance, addressing the ordinary end user. You install that in your tenant, provide it to all users or a group of users. You can also change logo and name to adjust it to your CI. Let's go one step over here, approvals. So we just had the approval in the automation. So you can, for example, let end users do an approval here. So we have an approval request in this example for the provisioning of a team site. So I get a lot of details here for the team site, who are the members and who was the requester and so on. So, and I was appointed as an approver, so I can approve it here, or I can decline also the approval and give a justification why. So this is one of the core parts of Rencore governance, that you give end users something into their hands in a place where they are familiar with, and that is Teams in our opinion. On the contrary to maybe other solutions out there, we do not believe that it's a wise idea that somebody needs to open a website and go somewhere and so on. It should be in the environment where they spend most of their time anyway. We're currently revamping this entire Nova application to even look more like Teams, so that it's indistinguishable for an end user that this is actually Rencore. They will believe this is an out-of-the-box application of Microsoft to minimize friction so much that these maybe rather cumbersome processes to, for example, comply to a policy for a resource that I own, to make that as simple and as easy and familiar as it can be. So as we're already here, now let's maybe jump to one more area. This is access reviews. So of course, a core part of governance and helping to secure your Microsoft 365 environment and make sure that Copilot is only accessing the right resources and providing the answers from where somebody should have access. You require also an access review component. And the access review component is also here for the end user directly in the Nova app. So you see in this case, Megan, the user that I'm logged in here, has a lot of access reviews to do right now. It's our demo data, of course, but you see I can start the access review. I see already who are the reviewers, so if there are images that would show here. And then I start the whole thing and see who has access means. So you see, for example, Joni is directly permitted in the visitors group. I already marked her for remove previously. So when I submit that access review, this action will be performed and Joni will be removed from that group. But we see also, for example, there are additional users that are permitted through a security group. So these people are not directly permitted in the SharePoint site. This is now something specific, of course, also for SharePoint. So these I cannot remove. This is disabled here. For that, I would need to do an access review on the Microsoft 365 group, because the group could be used in other places as well. And then suddenly Fabiola would lose, for example, access to other resources where the group has been used. So it's a little bit split up. If there is, for example, broken permissions, if you're familiar in my SharePoint, you can permit an individual file or a folder or a library to people who do not have access to the site. Then it will break the permission inheritance, and that would be shown here for the files that are not inheriting permissions from the site. And you could restore that, or you could also add additional users or remove individuals. That gives you a very flexible way of managing your permissions. And then you look at the summary, and then you could approve the review for the actions to be performed. How does that look on the other side? So an access review, you see there are plenty already created. An access review is, again, query. So you see we have a lot of different types of access reviews. And if I go into the other environment, then we see actually also for Copilot Studio agents, for Power BI dashboards, and so on. And let's do one for Teams in this example. So I can say, I want to do this access review maybe every 3 months, and not for all teams. Now I want to do this for teams that have any external in there. Because this is a higher risk, obviously, and I want the owner to make sure that only the externals who really need access to this team actually have also access. Then I can choose, do I actually want to perform the access review, or is this just informational? If I toggle that off, then it would be just in the back end of Rencore governance. If I turn that off, on, it would actually initiate an access review that is delegated to the owners, or if you want also to specific users that might not necessarily have access to the resource itself. So it's possible to delegate the process of reviewing, for example, to an assistant or to a security person when it's something very sensitive information or something like that. So that is access reviews. I'm not going so much more into detail, but you see you can build different types of access reviews. You can see all the objects that are currently matching that access review, and you can jump in and see, okay, in this case, it has already expired, so I could extend the period here. From the back end, I can still approve or abort it, but in the Teams app, this would now be locked, and then I can do also all these actions directly. Going back to the Teams app, as we intend Teams to be the hub for employees to manage their resources, we also provide them an overview of what they actually own and where they are members of. So this is very easy then for someone who is working with Teams or Microsoft in general to see, oh, yeah, I'm actually, OneDrive, maybe not a good example, but I'm actually the owner of multiple teams here. So I can jump to those teams. And we're currently in the middle of revamping the entire Nova app, as I mentioned before. So we will add a lot of more functionality here to actually self-service manage a lot of this stuff. So users, members, guests, properties, also making sure that policies that you set up, that the owner of the resource sees them here and sees, oh, I'm violating a naming convention, for example. I use a critical word in the name, or I need to appoint an additional owner. We can manage that already now through automations, but we'll add also more self-service component directly here into the My Objects view, so that somebody can also manually do that whenever they have the time for it. Then last but not least, we have a workspace directory. So these are the workspaces, meaning teams, SharePoint sites, we've engaged communities where the user has currently access and can quickly jump into. So if you're in the Teams app, it would jump directly to the team. But this is also the place where you can request a new workspace. And you see right now, I have 3 templates provided. So we have a department workspace, I have a partner team, and I have a team site. So these are currently assigned to me. They are way more configured in the environment, but they are targeted to security groups who can actually use them. So you can have, for example, an HR onboarding template that only HR people are able to use. And then you can use that template. You can provide additional information here. So there's also a free text component that can be added. Give it a name, a description. You can configure it, who should be the owners, the members, which channels should be provisioned already, which apps. And then you submit it. And then either it gets provisioned automatically or there's maybe an approval step behind. Now let me show you the same thing from the back end. For the person who is configuring everything. Here are all the provisioning requests that are currently active or already completed or maybe had an error. But you can see there are many, many templates that are created. Some of them are turned off right now, but those 3 are turned on. And what is a template? Template is basically a standardized, configuration of that specific resource that you want to use as a template for anyone to create a new one. So you can build as many templates as you want, and that could be a team, it could be an engaged community, it could be also, if I go to the other environment, just let me show you here, it could be also, for example, a Copilot Studio agent. So you could provision also the agent for the end user. And let's choose the team. You give the template a name and a description. You define who is allowed to see it. So maybe only myself for testing purposes, or only specific security groups, give it an icon. And then you can configure a lot of settings. So is it a public or a private team? Does it have a sensitivity level pre-assigned, owners pre-assigned, members, policies, like a naming convention? Again, you can use placeholders from the request, maybe the department name, and a suffix. You can modify their mail nickname, add default channels, apps, define settings already, site settings, a custom site URL. We have customers, for example, that want numbered URLs so that it's easy to repurpose also sites for if somehow a reorg is happening and so on. So you can accomplish that here. So you can choose, for example, there are, let me see here, for example, a timestamp. So you can build a unique number from a timestamp, for example, or use certain IDs that we have available in the app. And it's also possible to add a PNP template in the background. So if you want to do something really sophisticated, you can upload a PNP provisioning template, add the placeholders in the template, similar like you would do here in the fields, and then will be used for provisioning. So a very flexible approach. Then the approval step. And now this was more a simple view. And now I want to show you how powerful this actually is. Because at the end, in Rencore governance, a provisioning process and a template is at the end only an automation. So I can open that in advanced mode. And you see, this is an actual automation that is triggered by the provisioning form. Then it sends an email. Then it asks for approval from the manager. Then, if the approval has been given, it provisions the team. And here you see all the settings that we just had before. So the apps, the settings, the site settings, and so on. And then it sends an email that it has been provisioned. Or if it was declined, the approval was not given, then you can also send an email or trigger a webhook or whatever you want to do. And that, of course, opens up a wealth of possibilities, because you can have multi-step approvals. You can trigger a separate system that registered that provision team. You can add a service account after the provisioning that should always be there. You can take away permissions. I don't know, that there are no normal owners in there, or whatever you like. Basically, you can customize in that entire process and automate that process for you. So that makes it obviously extremely powerful. All right, that's it. So this was a run through of Rencore governance with some angle around Copilot, Copilot Studio. I showed you only briefly what you can do. So, for example, agents, we have an inventory for all agents that are currently in the environment, and so on. The best way to learn more about Rencore governance is to either reach out to us on our website and ask us. We can give you an individual demo. We can hear about your use cases and show you how you can resolve them very quickly with Rencore. But you can also just go on our website and start a trial. So we offer a 30-day free trial that has almost no limitations. So you can also connect even your production tenant if you're willing to, or a dev tenant, or you can just play around with the demo data that we provide already without any risk at all, just to get a feeling on how Rencore Governance could actually help you in your organization to stay in control of Teams, SharePoint, AI, agents, and so on, and hopefully not run back into that mess. All right. So going back to the slide deck, Rencore Governance, to sum it up, covers governance for three main areas. One of them is Microsoft 365, so all collaboration resources. Then the second, which we just introduced, is Copilot and agents. And then last, we have Power Platform, which is more focusing on the organizations who build their own apps on top of Microsoft. So that includes also Power BI since last quarter. So you are able to also track dashboards and reports and usage of Power BI. These three areas somehow depend on each other, of course. So Copilot, SharePoint agents require SharePoint data. So it allows you to also grow into that platform, maybe start with collaboration and then focus on other things, but it's also possible to just focus on the AI topics, for example, or only the Power Platform topics first. Our challenges that we address with Rencore are basically three main pillars. We saw already the inventory, cloud management. It's also possible, of course, to manually manage resources. So in a sense, an administration layer on top of the Microsoft 365 admin centers. We also allow, for example, to segment a tenant for different subsidiaries or country organizations that they can only manage their parts and provide the reports and insights. Then the second pillar is all around cloud governance. So it's monitoring the policies, enforcing policies, managing lifecycle, provisioning. So governance starts at the beginning, creating resources in the right way is less work than maintaining them in the future, than opening it up for everyone and needing to rein it in at a later point. Decluttering is an ongoing process. Chaos constantly re-emerges, so you will always need to declutter service. And then everything around risk and security, so oversharing, identifying externally shared data, files, and so on, automated access reviews. You saw that permission management directly on the resource, risk management, readiness of Copilot, and in general compliance to also regulations to supporting, for example, GDPR or with the EU AI Act to get a register of where you are using AI in your environment. And then last but not least, storage optimization, cost optimization in general, licensing costs, usage costs, measuring adoption and getting the ROI. This is where Rencore Governance can help. So as you can see, a very broad use case behind of it. Governance is not just insights and reporting. It's not just provisioning. It's a lot more. And our approach is to help organizations to manage the entire process from start to finish. You do not have to do everything at once. It's a modular approach. You can start maybe simple with just getting the insights and then upgrade later on additional modules, or you can start with different services so that you're very flexible there, but it gives you the ability to use one platform that eventually rules them all, that gives you the entire lifecycle management from start to end. Just want to add maybe at the end, Rencore is of course an enterprise ready software. So we are, it's a very scalable software. I mentioned that already before. We're currently hosted in 5 Azure data centers worldwide, several in Europe, Australia and North America. We are of course also certified with all security certifications that are available. And yeah, because of that, because we are such an organization, we have, of course, also a wealth of customers who are leveraging Rencore for their governance needs. And as you can see, there is the problem is omnipresent. It doesn't really matter which industry you're on. If you're in pharma or healthcare or aviation or government or food and beverage or whatever, it's very omnipresent, the challenges. Also doesn't really matter the size. So although we help a lot of large enterprises, we have also smaller clients because the problems are there everywhere. The challenges are there and need to be solved everywhere. So I hope that gives you a good insight where Rencore can help you, and hopefully this is something that you are also interested in to explore deeper. We would be very happy to hear from you. That said, thank you very much for spending the time and attending this webinar. If you have any further questions, please come to our website at rencore.com, reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help.